I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her pack as if she were going on some casual weekend getaway. Her hands moved swiftly, tucking designer dresses into a suitcase, rolling silk scarves neatly, securing bottles of perfume in a velvet pouch. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. Every movement screamed certainty, as if she had already made peace with what she was about to do. I waited. I wanted to see if she would pause, if she would glance at me, if she would sense the tension rising in the air. But she didn't. She hummed softly under her breath, a light, cheerful tune, the kind she always sang when she was excited about something. Excited. She was excited to miss our daughter's wedding. Are you really doing this? My voice came out lower than I intended, thick with disbelief. She didn't look up. Doing what? I let out a humorless chuckle. Skipping our daughter's wedding. Skipping one of the most important days of her life to go on vacation with your mother. That finally made her pause. She sighed as if I was exhausting her, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Mom planned this months ago, and it's important to her. We can't just cancel. It's a family thing. Family. That word left a bitter taste in my mouth. What kind of mother chooses a trip over her own daughter's wedding? My voice was steady, but inside, I was shaking with fury. She turned to face me then, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. You're overreacting. I laughed. A short, sharp sound. Overreacting? I took a step forward. Our daughter is getting married tomorrow. She's been dreaming of this day since she was a child. She wanted you to help her get ready. She wanted you to be there when she walked down the aisle. She wanted her mother in the front row watching her start a new life. And she has you. My wife cut in, her tone clipped. She'll be fine. She has plenty of support. I stared at her, feeling something inside me shift. I had known for years that she put her mother first. I had seen it in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different decisions. But this was different. This was the moment I realized I was married to a woman who had never truly belonged to me. I took a slow, deliberate breath. If you walk out that door, things will never be the same. She shrugged. You're being dramatic. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to force her to see what she was doing. But I knew it wouldn't matter. I had spent 25 years waiting for her to put this family first. She never would. And so, I stepped back. I watched her zip up her suitcase, grab her handbag, and check her reflection in the mirror. Then she walked past me, down the stairs, and out the front door without a single glance back. That was the last moment she was my wife. Because unlike her, I didn't make emotional decisions. I made calculated ones. And by the time she and her mother boarded that plane, they had unknowingly ended their connection to me forever. But unlike them, I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to beg, cry, or demand an apology. I had a plan. I sat in the quiet house, staring at the untouched wedding invitation on the dining table. The gold lettering gleamed under the dim light, a cruel reminder of what had just happened. Our daughter was getting married, and her mother, the woman who had carried her for 9 months, raised her, promised to always be there for her, was sipping cocktails on a beach instead. How did we get here? I leaned back, rubbing my temples. But I already knew the answer. The signs had been there from the start. From the moment I married her, it was never just the two of us. Her mother had always been there, a constant third presence in our marriage. I was young and in love, too blind to see the truth. I had assumed that once we built a life together, once we had a home, once we had children, she would start prioritizing our family. I was wrong. Every major decision had been filtered through her mother. The house we bought? Her mother had to approve the location. The names of our children? Her mother had given suggestions and dismissed the ones I liked. The holidays? Always spent with her family, never mine. At first, I chalked it up to normal family closeness. I didn't want to be the husband who pulled his wife away from her mother. I wanted to be understanding. But there was a fine line between being close and being completely controlled. I should have noticed it years ago, when she called her mother before making even the smallest decisions. Mom, should I get the blue dress or the red one? Mom, what do you think about taking the kids to Disney? Mom, do you think we should invest in that property? I was just the husband, the father of her children, the man who worked hard to provide for his family. But when it came down to it, My opinion never truly mattered. And somehow, I let it slide. For 25 years, I let it slide. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that as long as our marriage functioned, I could tolerate her mother's influence. I ignored the little moments where I felt like an outsider in my own family. I buried my resentment, thinking love would be enough to hold things together. But love wasn't enough. Respect was. And when she chose a beach vacation over our daughter's wedding, I knew she didn't respect me. She didn't respect our daughter. She didn't respect the life we had built together. That was the final straw. I picked up the wedding invitation, running my fingers over the embossed letters. Our daughter had spent months planning this day, dreaming of the moment she would walk down the aisle, waiting to see her mother's face in the crowd. But she wouldn't see her mother. I thought back to the conversation we had weeks ago when she first found out her mother wasn't coming. She's really not coming? My daughter's voice had been small, disbelieving. She's going on a trip with your grandmother instead, I had said carefully, watching her expression shift. But she knew my wedding date. She knew. And she still chose a vacation? There had been a long silence. Then, a bitter laugh from my daughter. Typical. That single word had hit me harder than I expected. Typical. It made me realize something I had refused to acknowledge for years. This wasn't new. This wasn't shocking. This was just another example of my wife choosing her mother over her own family. The only difference was, this time, the person she hurt wasn't just me. It was our daughter. And that was unforgivable. I stood up, tossing the invitation onto the table. The anger I had been holding back for years finally settled into something sharper, colder. I was done being a fool. I had spent 25 years being patient, being the understanding husband, being the man who let things slide for the sake of peace. But peace was an illusion when you were the only one fighting for it. I had fought for this marriage. I had fought to build a family. I had fought to be a good husband. She had never fought for me. And now, she had made it clear that she never would. I walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured myself a glass of whiskey. The ice clinked against the glass, a steady, rhythmic sound in the silence of the house. I took a sip, letting the burns settle in my chest. Unlike her, I wouldn't make emotional decisions. She thought she could come back from this. She thought she could step off that plane, walk into our home, and find everything exactly as she left it. She thought she could brush this off, that I would be angry for a few weeks, but ultimately forgive her, like I always did. She had no idea. I wasn't going to yell or beg or demand an apology. I was going to make sure she never had a reason to smile again. Because this wasn't just about the wedding. This was about every single moment she had put me second. Every moment she had dismissed my feelings. Every moment she had chosen her mother over her own family. By the time she came back, she wouldn't recognize the life she left behind. Because by the time she stepped off that plane, she wouldn't have a life to come back to. I didn't storm out. I didn't break things. I didn't even call her and demand she reconsider. That wasn't my style. Instead, while my wife and her mother were busy sipping expensive cocktails under a sun-drenched sky, taking selfies with captions about family bonding, I was dismantling everything she took for granted. She thought she had security. She thought she had control. She thought she had me. She had no idea how wrong she was. I sat in my office, fingers drumming lightly against the desk as I reviewed the legal documents spread before me. Years ago, I had been naive. I had trusted her blindly, assuming we were partners in every sense of the word. But as the years passed, and her allegiance to her mother remained unshakable, I learned to prepare for the inevitable. She never bothered with the details. Sure, she liked spending the money, but she never cared to ask where it came from, how it worked, or who controlled it. That was my job, and I did it well. Over the years, I had made sure our assets were arranged in a way that favored me. Not out of malice, at least not at first, but out of self-preservation. I knew who I was married to. I knew that, when the time came, she would pick her mother over me. I just didn't know how far she'd go. Now, I had my answer, and it was time to act. I picked up my phone and made the first call. "Move forward with the transfer," I said. The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "Understood. Everything will be finalized by the end of the week." I leaned back in my chair. That was one piece of the puzzle in place. My wife believed that our home was untouchable, that no matter what, she would always have it to fall back on. She was wrong. The house was never in her name. When we first bought it, I had structured the ownership under my business, keeping it out of her legal reach. She never questioned it. After all, she was too busy playing the role of a well-kept woman, too confident that I would never let her fall. She forgot one thing. Loyalty goes both ways. I made another call. The property is ready to be listed. Go ahead and proceed with the sale. Another piece moved. Next came the bank accounts. My wife believed she had access to everything. Credit cards, savings, investments. What she didn't realize was that, while she spent years mindlessly swiping and spending, I had been restructuring. Her cards? Canceled. Her access? Revoked. Her safety net? Gone. She would step off that plane and expect to return to the life she had always known. Instead, she would return to a life that no longer existed. I pictured her expression when she realized it. The confusion, the disbelief, the panic. It should have made me feel guilty. It didn't. Because this wasn't just about the money. This was about respect. This was about our daughter. This was about the years of watching her dismiss me, treat me like an afterthought while prioritizing the one woman who had made it clear that I would never be good enough. She had made her choice. Now, I was making mine. I turned my attention to the final part of my plan, the business. She never took an interest in it, never asked how it worked. All she cared about was the luxury it provided. The designer clothes, the weekend getaways, the fine dining. She had no idea that, behind the scenes, I was slowly untangling her from every financial tie. She thought she had influence through me. She was about to find out just how powerless she really was. I sent a final email, securing the last transfer that would remove her from any stake in my investments. Then, I sat back. Everything was in motion. She still had no idea. While she was laughing on the beach, sipping overpriced cocktails, thinking she had won, she was unknowingly losing everything. By the time she came back, her life would be unrecognizable. I glanced at my phone. The notifications were piling up. Pictures from our daughter's wedding. Messages from friends congratulating me on how beautiful the ceremony had been. She missed it. Not because she had to. Not because of some emergency. But because she chose to. That was what sealed her fate. The silent exit plan was in motion. And when she finally stepped off that plane, reality would hit her like a freight train. Because, unlike her, I don't make emotional decisions. I make final ones. And this was final. The wedding day arrived with a crisp autumn breeze and the kind of golden sunlight that photographers dream of. The air carried a sense of joy, the hum of excitement, the quiet anticipation of a perfect day. But one person was missing. As I stood at the front of the ceremony, adjusting the crisp cuffs of my suit, I glanced around at the guests settling into their seats. Rows of family and friends, all gathered to celebrate the union of two souls. Our daughter's big day. And yet, her mother wasn't here. Not because of an emergency. Not because of some unavoidable circumstance. Because she chose not to be. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the lingering bitterness. This wasn't the moment for anger. This was our daughter's day, and I had promised her that nothing, not even her mother's absence, would taint it. The music changed. The crowd shifted, standing as the bride appeared at the end of the aisle. And there she was. Our daughter. She was breathtaking, glowing with a kind of happiness that made my heart ache. Dressed in the softest white, a veil cascading behind her like a waterfall of lace. She held her bouquet with steady hands, her lips slightly parted, eyes glistening, not with tears of sadness, but with pure emotion. I met her eyes. She hesitated for half a second, then gave me a small, knowing nod. I knew what she was thinking. She's not here, but you are. And that was enough. I stepped forward, offering my arm. She took it, her fingers squeezing mine in silent gratitude. We walked together, the moment sacred, untainted by the absence of the woman who should have been here. As we approached the altar, I felt a wave of something unexpected. Not just sadness, not just disappointment, but peace. Because in the end, it didn't matter. She wasn't here, but I was. And I always would be. The ceremony continued, A beautiful exchange of vows, promises made under the watchful eyes of those who truly mattered. Our daughter and her husband spoke with conviction, their love clear in every trembling word. Tears were shed, laughter echoed, rings were exchanged, and in that moment, the woman who abandoned her own daughter for a vacation became nothing more than a distant memory. The reception was a whirlwind of celebration. The sound of clinking glasses, the warm glow of fairy lights strung across the venue, the laughter of guests dancing freely beneath a starlit sky. I sat at the father's table, sipping from a glass of whiskey, watching my daughter twirl on the dance floor with her new husband. Her joy was contagious, her laughter spilling into the air like the sweetest melody. She was happy, even without her mother. And yet, despite the warmth of the evening, I couldn't shake the thought of what would happen when my wife returned. Right now, she was somewhere thousands of miles away, completely unaware of the shift in the universe she once controlled. She still believed she had power. She still believed that, no matter what, she could waltz back into our lives as if nothing had happened. But that illusion was about to shatter. She had no home to return to, no money, no control. She was about to realize that, while she was busy sunbathing on a tropical island, I was rearranging the very foundation of her life. A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Dad." I turned. My daughter stood beside me, her eyes gentle, the corners of her lips pulled into a small smile. "Are you okay?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I forced a smile. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" She exhaled, taking a seat beside me, lifting the train of her dress over her lap. "She didn't even call," she murmured, her voice softer now, laced with something heavier than disappointment. I looked at her, waiting. Not even a text. Nothing. I placed my glass down, my fingers interlocking on the table. "She made her choice, sweetheart." She nodded, but there was something distant in her gaze. Not sadness, not anger, just quiet acceptance. "I thought it would hurt more," she admitted. "And does it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, not really." I reached over, squeezing her hand. "That's because deep down, you already knew." She swallowed, blinking rapidly, but she didn't cry. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think I did." We sat there for a while, neither of us speaking, just taking in the night, the warmth, the laughter, the realization that we didn't need her. Not anymore. Hours later, as the last guests departed, I stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The wind was cool now, carrying the distant hum of music from the last few stragglers inside. My phone buzzed. A notification. I pulled it from my pocket, unlocking the screen. It was a social media post. A picture of my wife and her mother, lounging on a resort deck, cocktails in hand, laughing at something in the distance. The caption read, "Nothing like a mother-daughter getaway. Cheers to family time." I stared at the screen for a long time. Not anger, not sadness, just certainty. She had no idea what was waiting for her. No idea that, by the time she returned, she would have nothing. No idea that this was the last time she would feel secure, the last time she would believe she was in control. I put my phone back in my pocket and exhaled slowly, the night air crisp against my skin. Tomorrow, she would be stepping off a plane. Tomorrow, she would try to come home. Tomorrow, she would learn the true cost of her choices. And I would be there to watch her world burn. She arrived at the airport with a confident stride, dragging her sleek designer luggage behind her, completely unaware that her world had already begun to crumble. As she stepped outside, her phone buzzed in her purse. Probably a notification from some airline rewards program or another pointless group chat with her mother's friends. Not a single missed call from me. Not a single text from our daughter. But she didn't seem to notice. Hailing a cab, she leaned back in the seat, letting out a sigh of exhaustion. "Home," she murmured as she gave the driver our address, already picturing herself walking through the front door, kicking off her sandals and unwinding with a warm bath. Probably expecting me to be there, waiting, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't abandoned her daughter's wedding. As if she hadn't betrayed this family for the last time. She had no idea that home didn't exist anymore. The cab slowed to a stop in front of what used to be our house. The moment she looked up, her relaxed posture stiffened. Her eyes widened in disbelief, her fingers tightening around the door handle as if she needed to steady herself. Because the house she had taken for granted, the house she believed would always be there waiting for her, was gone. Demolished. Where once stood a beautifully manicured lawn and a grand front door leading to the life she assumed was untouchable, there was now only a vacant lot. A patch of empty land surrounded by caution tape, tire tracks still fresh in the dirt where the demolition crew had worked. Everything was gone. The car, the garden, the driveway, all of it. She scrambled out of the cab, heart pounding, her expensive suitcase hitting the pavement with a dull thud. Her breathing was sharp, frantic. She turned in circles, as if expecting the house to reappear if she blinked enough times. It didn't. She spun toward the nearest worker, a man in an orange vest who was sweeping debris into a pile. Where's the house?" she demanded, voice cracking. The man barely glanced at her before shrugging. "Torn down last week. Owner sold the property." The color drained from her face. "That's impossible," she whispered. "This is my house." The worker frowned, finally looking up at her. "Lady, I don't know what to tell you. The papers were all in order. The owner sold it. Guess you should ask him about it." It hit her then. I was the owner. I had sold it. Her lips parted, shock giving way to panic. She fumbled for her phone, her manicured fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. She called me once. No answer. She called again. Nothing. She tried our daughter next. Straight to voicemail. The silence around her grew heavier. The world felt colder. For the first time in her life, she was truly, utterly alone. She turned back to the worker, desperate. Where did everything go? My things? My furniture? My clothes? The worker sighed, clearly bored with the conversation. Don't know, lady. Probably auctioned or trashed. Not my job to keep track of people's stuff. Auctioned. Trashed. Gone. Her world was spinning now, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. I need to go to the bank," she mumbled, stumbling toward her suitcase. Maybe the accounts were fine. Maybe she could fix this. She had no idea. Her accounts were gone, too. By the time she arrived at the bank, she was shaking. Her mother had joined her now, trailing behind her, muttering under her breath about how this had to be some kind of mistake, about how she'd fix this and call the right people. But there were no right people to call. When my wife handed over her bank card to the teller, her voice was barely steady. "I need to check my accounts." The woman behind the counter took the card, swiped it, and then frowned slightly before typing something into her computer. A long pause. Then, the woman cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, but this account has been closed." My wife blinked. "Excuse me?" The teller glanced at the screen again, her polite smile stiff. "It appears all accounts under this name were closed and transferred 3 days ago." Her mother bristled beside her. "Transferred where?" "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information," the teller replied smoothly. My wife's breath hitched. "No, that's a mistake. I didn't close anything." The teller only gave her a professional smile, the kind that didn't care about her personal crisis. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing I can do." My wife staggered back, gripping the counter as her mother hissed at her. "Call him," her mother snapped. "This has to be some kind of joke." So she did. One final call. And this time, I answered. I didn't say hello. I didn't offer explanations. I simply let her sit in silence for a moment, let her feel the weight of everything crashing down around her. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "What did you do?" I exhaled slowly, savoring the moment. "I did what you did. I made a choice." She sucked in a breath. "Where's my money? Where's our house? Where's—" I cut her off. "It was never yours." Silence. Tense. Heavy. Then, a broken whisper. "You took everything." I smiled. "No. You gave it away. When you walked out on our daughter, when you chose your mother over your family, you handed me everything I needed. You just didn't realize it." A sharp inhale. A choked sound. Then, an explosion of rage. "You can't do this to me." "You'll what?" I asked smoothly. Sue me? Take me to court? With what money? Her breath hitched. She knew the answer. She had nothing. I let the silence drag again before delivering the final blow. Enjoy your new life, sweetheart. Hope it was worth the vacation. Then, I ended the call. And as I sat back in my chair, I knew. For the first time in 25 years, I was finally free. She had never faced true fear before. Not the kind that tightens around your ribs and steals the breath from your lungs. Not the kind that makes the world tilt beneath your feet, leaving you grasping at nothing. Until now, as she stood in the middle of the bank, the cold weight of reality pressed down on her, suffocating. She gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white, her lips parted in disbelief. This has to be a mistake, she whispered, voice trembling. The teller, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, gave her a polite but indifferent look. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing I can do. The accounts have been closed. Closed? My wife's voice cracked. By who? The teller hesitated, then gave a carefully worded answer. The account holder. Her face drained of color. Because she wasn't the account holder. I was. Her mother, standing beside her, let out an irritated huff. Well, where is the money? She snapped. Surely there's some mistake. You can't just… I'm afraid I can't disclose that information, the teller interrupted smoothly, offering the same fake sympathy she'd probably given 100 other desperate people before. My wife's breathing turned erratic. Her head spun. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. The accounts were gone? Every single one? That meant her credit cards, her savings, her safety net. She reached for her purse with trembling hands, fumbling for her platinum credit card, the one she had used for years without a second thought. She slammed it onto the counter. Run this, she ordered. The teller took it, swiped it, and barely glanced at the screen before handing it back. Declined. Her stomach twisted violently. Try again, she demanded. The teller did. The result was the same. Her mother's mouth twisted in disgust. This is ridiculous. Call your manager. We're not leaving until we get some answers. The teller pressed her lips together but nodded, disappearing into a back office. Silence settled between them. My wife's heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the sounds of the bank, the quiet murmur of other customers, the distant clatter of a keyboard. The room felt smaller, colder. This wasn't just an error. This was a calculated move. And there was only one person capable of pulling something like this off. She swallowed hard, pulling out her phone, her fingers moving clumsily as she opened our bank app. The loading screen spun for what felt like an eternity. Then, account not found. Her stomach dropped. No balance. No history. No access. Gone. I did this. Her mouth went dry. For years, she had lived under the illusion that she controlled our life. That because she spent the money, she had power. That because she had my name attached to her accounts, she was secure. But she had never asked how those accounts worked. She never questioned why I insisted on handling the finances. She never thought to check who truly owned everything. And now it was too late. Her mother leaned in, voice sharp. What is it? My wife didn't answer. She was already dialing. I knew the call was coming. That's why, when my phone rang, I took my time answering. Hello? I said, my voice calm. Where's my money? I smiled. You mean my money? A sharp inhale. Don't play games with me. I have nothing. Nothing. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. Then, I said it. You chose this. Her breath hitched. I didn't choose. You did, I interrupted smoothly. You chose her over me. Over our daughter. Over our family. You chose vacations over commitments. You chose luxury over loyalty. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. Now, you have nothing. And the best part? You deserve it. The line went silent. Then, a sob. A raw, broken sound that would have once made me feel something. Not anymore. I had given her years of warnings. Years of patience. Years of chances. She burned every single one. And now, the fire had consumed everything she thought was hers. She sniffed, voice weaker now. You can't just do this to me. I'm your wife. I let out a humorless chuckle. No, I said, you were my liability, and I just erased you. Another sob. Another desperate inhale. Her mother grabbed the phone from her. You vindictive bastard, she hissed. How dare you? How dare I? I cut in. No. How dare you? You controlled her like a puppet. You turned her against me. You made her believe she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. I leaned forward, my voice lower. But guess what? Consequences are here, and they're long overdue. Her mother started to curse, but I ended the call before she could finish. I stared at my phone for a moment, letting out a slow breath. It was done. She had nothing. No home, no money, no security. For the first time in her life, she would have to struggle. She would have to feel the weight of abandonment, the way our daughter had, the way I had. And that was justice. As I placed my phone down, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. No more waiting for her to change. No more hoping for something she would never give. No more carrying the weight of a woman who never valued me. This was her lesson to learn. And I had no doubt it would be a painful one. For the first time in her life, my wife was powerless. She stood frozen outside the bank, her mother pacing angrily beside her. Pedestrians passed by, paying them no mind, their lives moving forward while hers came to a violent halt. Everything she had once counted on, her wealth, her status, her security, had vanished. And worst of all, she had nowhere to go. Her hands trembled as she tried dialing again. My number. Our daughter's number. The bank again. The financial advisor who used to handle our investments. No one answered. No one would. Her mother let out an exasperated sigh, crossing her arms. This is ridiculous. He can't just do this. We need to go to his office. We'll force him to explain himself. My wife swallowed hard, her throat tight, dry. You think he's still at his office? She murmured. Her mother faltered. Because she knew. I was always 10 steps ahead. And she also knew that if I had gone this far, there was no one doing it. Then what do? Her mother snapped. We can't just stand here. For the first time, my wife didn't have an answer. Because she had never had to figure things out on her own. I was the one who had built the foundation of our life. I was the one who had taken care of the finances, the bills, the responsibilities. She had spent years living in comfort, believing I would always be there, always supporting her, always making sure she had a roof over her head. She had never once considered what would happen if I stopped. Now, she had no choice but to face that reality. Her mother scoffed, rolling her eyes. Fine, we'll go home and figure it out there. My wife flinched. We don't have a home. Her mother froze. What? She inhaled shakily, her hands balling into fists. He sold the house. It's gone. Her mother's face twisted in disbelief. What do you mean gone? I mean it's gone, my wife snapped, her voice rising. It's been demolished. There's nothing left. Her mother's mouth opened and closed, as if trying to argue, but no words came out. Because what could she say? Her safety net had always been me, but I had cut them both off completely, and now there was only one option left. A small, cheap, run-down rental apartment. Because despite all the control her mother once had, despite the arrogance, the entitlement, the manipulation, she had nothing, too. 3 weeks later, word spread fast. I didn't have to check social media to know what people were saying. Mutual friends, colleagues, even distant family members had all heard about what had happened. The whispers, the speculation, the curiosity. Did she really abandon her daughter's wedding? Did he really take everything? How could she not see this coming? But the best part? No one was taking her side. Not even the people who had once been her closest friends. Because the truth was too clear to ignore. She had done this to herself, and now she was living the consequences. Inside the apartment, the space was cramped, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of mildew. The couch was old, the mattress on the floor barely comfortable, and the kitchen was barely big enough to stand in. She had never lived like this before, and neither had her mother. The woman who had spent years treating me like I was beneath her, like I wasn't good enough for her daughter, like I should be grateful she had allowed me into their lives, was now eating instant noodles on a secondhand couch, scrolling through job listings she was overqualified for but had no choice but to apply to. And my wife? She barely spoke, because for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. No house, no money, no power. She had called every friend, every acquaintance, trying to secure a place to stay, a loan, an opportunity. No one helped her, because no one owed her anything. For years, she had lived under the illusion that she was untouchable, that her mother's influence would always protect her, that she could do whatever she wanted, and I would always be there to catch her. But now, she was truly alone, and she knew it. Meanwhile, in my life, I sat in my new office, sipping coffee, watching the city skyline through the large windows. Peace. That's what I felt. No more second-guessing myself. No more resentment eating away at me. No more carrying the weight of a woman who never valued me. For years, I had given her every opportunity to change, to put our family first. She never did. And now, she was experiencing what it felt like to be discarded. The way she had discarded our daughter. The way she had discarded me. And honestly, I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. Because, in the end, she had built her own downfall. I had simply stepped aside and let it happen. And from where I sat, miles away from the wreckage she now lived in, I didn't regret a single thing. I had spent the past few weeks hearing little whispers about my wife's downfall. At first, they came from mutual acquaintances, always cautious, always hesitant to ask too many questions. Then, as the weeks stretched on, those whispers turned into open discussions. People talked. Some pretended to be shocked. Others called it karma. And I let them talk, because I had no interest in just watching her suffer. I had one more move left to make. Her mother had always been the puppet master, the one who controlled my wife's every decision, the one who treated me like an outsider in my own marriage. And she had one last thing left to lose. Her business. She had spent years boasting about it, acting as though her success made her untouchable. She had built her empire on the backs of people like me, people she looked down on, people she thought would never amount to anything without her approval. But there was one thing she never realized. I had been watching, waiting, and now, I had the perfect opportunity to take everything she thought was hers. The boardroom war. The meeting was set for noon in a sleek, glass-walled conference room in the heart of the city. My wife's mother had no idea what was about to happen. She walked in with her usual air of superiority, dressed in one of her tailored business suits, heels clicking against the polished floor. Even after losing everything, she still carried herself like a queen, still clung to the belief that she could claw her way back to the top. I almost admired her delusion. Almost. She didn't notice me at first. She was too focused on shaking hands with board members, on smoothing her hair, on flashing a fake smile as she sat at the head of the table. I stayed silent, watching. Then, the meeting started. And the moment she saw the first slide on the presentation screen, her own company's financial records laid bare for everyone to see, her smile vanished. The numbers didn't lie. Her business was failing. Slowly, steadily, crumbling beneath her. Debt piling up. Investors backing out. Creditors circling like vultures. And then, the final blow. The announcement of the new owner. Me. She turned slowly, as if the weight of the moment was too much for her to process all at once. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide, unblinking, disbelief turning to horror. "You," she breathed, barely a whisper. I smiled. Surprised? Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You," she started, her voice shaking. "You don't belong here." I leaned forward, my hands folded on the table. "That's where you're wrong." I let the silence stretch, savoring the way the boardroom had gone completely still. "See, while you were busy ruining your daughter's wedding, while you were choosing vacations over family, while you were busy living under the illusion that you still had control," I gestured to the screen, my voice turning cold. "I was buying you out." She inhaled sharply. "You." I cut her off. "I bought out your silent partners. I acquired your debts. I made sure that by the time you realized what was happening, it would be too late." Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "You can't do this," she whispered, shaking her head. "This company, this is my legacy." I shrugged. Not anymore. The room was dead silent. No one stepped in to defend her. No one argued on her behalf. Because everyone knew the truth. She had ruled with arrogance for years. She had built a kingdom of sand. And I had simply waited for the tide to come in. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Given the recent changes in ownership, we'll need to proceed with the transition plan." He turned to me. "Sir, would you like to proceed with the restructuring?" My wife's mother flinched. "Sir." She had never heard anyone call me that before. Not in this room. Not in her world. Because in her mind, I was nothing. But now, I was everything. I tapped my fingers on the table, pretending to think. Then, I gave a small nod. "Yes," I said. "Effective immediately." She let out a choked sound. "You can't just—" I stood, adjusting my suit. I already did. Then, I turned and walked out. And I didn't look back. The aftermath. By the time the news broke, I was already back home, sipping a glass of whiskey on my balcony. Her company? Gone. Her influence? Destroyed. Her legacy? Wiped clean. She had spent decades controlling people, manipulating, thinking she was invincible. And now, she was nothing. I checked my phone. A flood of messages. Some from business associates congratulating me. Some from old friends who had seen the headlines. And one missed call from my wife. I let it go to voicemail. Then, another. Then, a text. "Please, we need to talk." I laughed. Now she wanted to talk? When she had abandoned our daughter. When she had chosen luxury over family. When she had believed she was untouchable. I typed a single response. "I have nothing to say to you." Then, I blocked her number. She had nothing left. And that was exactly what she deserved. Days passed. Then weeks. The world moved forward, but my wife and her mother remained trapped in the wreckage of the life they had lost. I didn't need updates. I didn't need to ask around. I already knew. The fall from privilege was never gentle. I imagined my wife waking up every morning in that cramped apartment, the ceiling water-stained, the air heavy with regret. I pictured her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of unpaid bills, the empty fridge, the reality that she could no longer swipe a credit card and make everything disappear. I wondered if she thought about me when she walked past the expensive jewelry she could no longer afford, when she saw old friends at the grocery store who now avoided her gaze because they knew the truth. I wondered if she thought about our daughter when she scrolled through photos of the wedding she wasn't in. And I wondered if she regretted it, if she finally realized what she had done. I was at my office when I got the call. Not from her. From a mutual friend. "You should hear this." Curiosity won out. I listened. And what I heard, it was better than I could have imagined. The breaking point. My wife sat across from her mother in their small, dimly lit apartment. The tension between them was suffocating. At first, they had been united in their anger, their disbelief, blaming me. But as the weeks dragged on, as the reality of their new lives hardened around them, something had shifted. The whispers had started slowly. Blame turned inward. First, it was little things. Her mother snapped at her about money. My wife rolled her eyes about how this wouldn't have happened if she had been given more control. But then it got worse. Much worse. "You always listened to me before," her mother muttered, arms crossed. My wife's eyes darkened. "Yeah? And look where that got me." Her mother stiffened. "Excuse me?" My wife exhaled sharply, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "I lost everything." Her voice cracked. "Everything, Mom." A sharp laugh. Bitter. Cold. "And that's my fault?" My wife's lip curled. "I chose you over my own daughter." Silence. Heavy. Tense. My wife clenched her fists. "You told me that family sticks together. That we'd always take care of each other. That I didn't have to worry about my husband's threats." Her voice wavered. "But you didn't prepare me for this." Her mother's jaw tightened. "If you had controlled him properly." My wife slammed her hands against the table. "Control him," she spat. "You don't control people, Mom. Not forever." Her mother scoffed. "You never should have married him." My wife laughed then. A sharp, humorless sound. You always say that. But you had no problem spending his money. No problem letting me play the perfect wife as long as we had the life you wanted. Her mother's nostrils flared. Watch your tone. Or what? My wife's voice cracked. What are you gonna do, Mom? Ground me? You have no money. No influence. You can't even afford to leave this apartment. A deep, rattling silence settled between them. For the first time in her life, my wife saw the truth. Her mother wasn't strong. She was just loud. Her power had come from manipulation, control. But now, she had nothing to hold over her daughter anymore. No home, no money, no power. And my wife finally realized it. A shaky breath, a swallow. Then, a whisper. I should have gone to the wedding. Her mother's expression twisted. Don't be ridiculous. I should have chosen my daughter. You're just upset. He manipulated this entire thing, and you're falling for it. My wife laughed. No bitterness. No malice. Just something broken. He didn't have to manipulate anything, Mom. I did this. To myself. Her mother's face paled. You don't mean that. But my wife wasn't listening anymore. Because for the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Not just physically, emotionally. The foundation of her life had shattered. And she finally understood that she had built it on sand. The final message. That night, I got a text. From her. It was short. Simple. I was wrong. About everything. I stared at the screen. The words clear. Almost desperate. Then another message. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed to say it. I exhaled slowly, fingers hovering over the keyboard. For years, I had waited for this moment. For her to realize. For her to understand. And now, here it was. But the funny thing? It didn't matter anymore. Because I had moved on. I had let go. So I typed back one response. Good. Now live with it. Then, I blocked her number. For good. Peace. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was just starting to rise, spilling golden light across my bedroom. No tension. No resentment. Just quiet. I made coffee. Sat on my balcony. Took a deep breath. And for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed. Freedom. No more walking on eggshells. No more waiting to be chosen. No more being second place in my own marriage. I was finally at peace. And my wife? She was finally experiencing what true abandonment felt like. The same way she had abandoned me. The same way she had abandoned our daughter. And that was justice.